It's shaping up to be the biggest economic package in U.S. history, and the debate over what it should include already at fever pitch here in Washington as Congress returns to work. Now we get two views on the issue of exactly what should be included in this package. Will Straw is Associate Director for Economic Growth at the Center for American Progress here in Washington. He's with me here in the studio. And Bill Beach is Director of the Center for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation. He's at Heritage's offices this evening. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for being here. Bill, I'll begin with you. We're hearing $775 billion at the low end over 2 years, perhaps as much as $1.3 trillion. And as much as $300 billion of that could go towards tax cuts. Does this all make sense to you?
Well, you know, in the end, we're going to be very concerned about what's in whatever amount. I've been telling Congress for over a year now, when I testify, when I work with them, that what they should be very careful to do is pass something that works, and that history says works. Now, if we look at past recessions, we kind of know how to get out of them from a public policy standpoint. Sometimes it's just patience and waiting them out. But monetary policy and good aggressive tax policy have been very effective tools in getting those recessions over and also helping with the recovery. So we want to put more emphasis on the tax side, help the Federal Reserve with its monetary policy, and make sure we don't burden the economy, the present economy or the future economy, Peter, with a lot of debt for projects that I'm going to say probably are not going to be as effective as if we were to reduce taxes on businesses and individuals.
All right. Will, what I hear in that answer there is Bill is not convinced as much about this notion of infrastructure spending. A lot of, on the fiscal side in terms of spending on projects, highways, computer systems, schools, whatever. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, we can all agree that tax cuts are an important part of this package, but we've seen over the last few months with the amount that the Fed has pumped into the economy that monetary policy is not doing all that it can do, and it's time for a proper fiscal stimulus as well, which includes some spending measures. The analysis done by Mark Zandi of Economy.com and Moody's is very clearly that infrastructure spending, help for those most in need is the most effective. It's also true that tax cuts to the middle classes will be effective, but we want to be careful about making sure that tax cuts don't go to those who actually don't need them.
Are there some people today, Will, talking about not only tax cuts for individuals, $500 or $1,000 for couples, which was what Barack Obama talked about in the campaign trail, but also tax breaks for businesses right now. Does that make sense for you? Do businesses deserve a tax break in this kind of economic environment?
Well, I think if they're the right tax breaks, then there's a good case for them. But we've got to make sure they do actually incentivize the creation of jobs and businesses keeping hold of people rather than just going to companies that have behaved very badly during this financial crisis. And we also need to consider that if there is an overall envelope of money that you're going to spend here, what's the most effective way to do it? And as I say, there's a strong consensus now that the best way to do that is through infrastructure spending, aid for states, and help for those most in need.
Bill, I'll let you speak for yourself on the infrastructure side of this.
Well, yes, Will has mentioned Mark Zandi. Certainly I have a lot of respect for Mark. I've worked with him in the past. But I've also worked with Christina Romer, who's the incoming chair of the Council of Economic Advisors for President-elect Obama. And she and her husband, David Romer, have written about what ends recessions. And they've been very clear about this. It's monetary policy and aggressive tax policy, and they have doubts about the spending side. And I have to tell you, just from a personal standpoint, I ran the budget for the state of Missouri for a while back in the 1980s. It shows my age. And we did a lot of infrastructure spending. It helped for a while, for a month, 2 months. When the projects were done, then the economy continued to lag. These are things you do, Peter. You do infrastructure to fix roads to make them work. You help people who are in need of a job with retraining. These you do for essentially charitable and for needed reasons. But if you want to stimulate the economy, you have to raise the growth rate and at a sustainable higher level for a long period of time. And that's why monetary policy and tax policy should be your emphasis. Of course, you put a couple of other things in there, but make sure the other things in there don't sacrifice what really has the bang for the buck, and those are those two things.
Will, do you disagree with anything there?
Well, I disagree on two accounts. The first is this is a very different kind of economic recession. Some economists are calling it a depression because it appears that monetary policy and the stimulative effect that can have isn't working in this occasion. So I think we need to discard that argument for tax cuts of that nature. The other is, where do you get the most bang for your buck? Well, Mark Zandi is a respected figure, and he says very clearly that you get much less bang for your buck from the kind of tax proposals that some people are suggesting than you do for the kind of infrastructure expenditure that Centre for American Progress is pushing for.
What are you talking about, Will, in terms of, hold on one sec, Bill, let me just get to pin you both down on how big this package needs to be, because again, these figures are starting to get absolutely enormous. What's an appropriate figure here for the government to spend?
Well, we published a report some time ago at the Centre for American Progress that suggested you would spend in the first year of an economic stimulus package, $300 billion on spending and some tax measures as well. That's perfectly consistent with the numbers we've seen floating over the weekend. It looks like that number, according to Harry Reid, could be going north of that. We are in a very, very difficult time. 1.9 million jobs lost in the first 11 months of 2008. The economy's been in recession for over a year. So the need could not be greater for a very large stimulus package.
All right. And Bill, do you have a figure in mind? If you incorporate your tax breaks and maybe not as much spending, what would be the right amount to jumpstart the U.S. economy right now?
Well, actually, I think Will's a little bit weak on that point, if I may say. We're about to publish a paper that has a combination of very aggressive tax reductions, and we have a 5-year program, $670 billion over that 5-year, a lot of it front-loaded, creating or protecting 3 million jobs over 2 years. We can do it through tax policy. And let me just dispute what seems to be a fundamentally agreed-upon notion. I don't agree that this is an unusually bad recession at this point. If you look back in 73 and 81, 82, we were clearly in much worse shape, higher unemployment, bigger collapses in the stock in the Dow Jones than the NASDAQ. We had deeper troughs. We were in rougher positions. And certainly in 81, 82, 83, we came out of it nationally by first aggressive tax cuts, and then it's very famous what Paul Volcker did on the monetary side. So again, you know, we're not in an unprecedented grounds, not as bad as the Depression. We should go back and keep our heads cool and do what's right.
All right. I got to leave it there. I'm sorry, Will. We'll have you both back. This is not a debate. It's going to end right here, I don't think. Will, Bill Beach, thanks to both of you for being here.